At first, welcome to those who just arrived during the last session or right now. We are happy to have you here today. Before we start with the next panel, the next lectures, I'd like to give some organizational information regarding, at first, the workshops, and second, guided tours during the lunch breaks. The workshops. So we have 3 workshops. Due to cancellation of one, the restructuring of the participant lists and so, I'd like to ask you to please register again via writing your names in the lists on the door. There are 3 lists for the 3 workshops. There are several spots left. For 2 workshops we have 30 spots, for 1 we have 20. So just look which you are interested in and write your name on the list, and then you can attend the workshop. If a list is full, then well, maybe we can ask the workshop holders later if 1 or 2 more persons are possible, but I would leave the decision with them. Second, during the lunch break, we're offering 3 different exhibition tours. The first one at 12:20, if we finish in time with this panel, at 12:20 is in German through our permanent exhibition downstairs, where the wardrobe and the bathrooms are. The second one is right after that, a tour through our permanent exhibition in English. And a third offer is a curator tour through our special exhibition about Vasil Stus that takes place on 1 p.m. So it's parallel to the English tour downstairs. If you have questions regarding that, please don't hesitate to ask me. Thank you. And the last information to the lunch for our speaker, we have small snacks in the room to this room. You can pick up there. So after this session, and for the other, we have 1 paper with recommendation for lunch. You can go, it's so very close here to the Institute, 5 or 2 minutes or 2 minutes we have. So the paper is on the front desk. So, thank you.
Thank you. So, welcome to session 4 under the topic dealing with the colonial legacy. And our first speaker is Professor Paweł Kubicki from Jagiellonian University in Kraków. He's a sociologist, and his research interests are sociology and anthropology of the city, social and urban movements, sociology of ethnicity and nation, and European identities. And just to name 2 or 3 of his big topics, he had a big project on adapting immigrants and refugees through urban activism. Another project on contested legacy, Central and Eastern European and Southern European competing narratives on authoritarian lieux de mémoire, and the new European Bauhaus, cities and urbanity after the pandemic. And we are very glad to listen to your talk on the tales of 3 cities, the post-colonial question in Central and Eastern Europe through the lens of the city and urbanity. So, floor is yours.
Thank you, Alexander, for such kind introduction to me, and thank you, Institute, for inviting me here. I'm really glad to, my honor to speak today to you. I will be speaking. I have a presentation. Excuse me. Oh. I will be speaking about urban question in Central Europe on the example of the 3 Polish cities, ex-German cities, Gdańsk, Wrocław, and Szczecin. As you can see, this title is quite long and a little bit sophisticated. So let me clarify at the beginning. Okay, Let me introduce you on the structure of this presentation. At the very beginning, I would like to very briefly analyze the colonial question, urban question in Central Europe through the lens of the longue durée, because in my opinion it's very important to understand contemporary urban question in this region. Then I will be analyze the syndrome so-called unwanted cities in the post-war Poland, ex-German city in Poland. Then I will be analyze the new context, last 2 decades. I call this very specific new context in Polish inventing urbanity, creation a new urban identity in Poland. And then I will focus on the topic of this presentation, the case study of 3 cities, Gdańsk, Wrocław, and Szczecin. And of course, as all presentations should end with the conclusion, and my presentation also will be ending with the conclusion. Very briefly, history. In the Middle Ages, Central European city, also in Polish city, was strongly influenced by German culture and German urban policies due to their location under German town law. So we, at the very beginning of Polish state, we can observe a rising strong ethnic and class conflict between German and Poles, because German language determined the status, the position of Central European city and Polish city, the status of burgher or bourgeoisie. Another important issue is that in the end of 15th century in Poland, as other Central European country, was introduced so-called the second serfdom. Second serfdom, the result of this second serfdom was that Polish peasants couldn't migrate to the cities. So for centuries, for Polish peasants, the city was perceived like alien, settled by and inhabited by mostly Germans and the Jewish. And for the Polish peasant and Polish gentry, these cities was perceived like alien. In my opinion, a very good summarizing this long history could be a quotation from British historian Norman Davies, that for Polish historians, great cities in Poland never played a very important role. In fact, Polish national identity was created in long durée on the basis on two strata, gentry and peasantry, beside or even against cities and urbanity. And in my opinion, this is very important to understand very contemporary attitudes to the urbanity and urban culture in Poland still today. For my presentation, for the topic, a very important period is, of course, the period post-war period, when the consequence of the Yalta Treaty is that Poland lost the eastern provinces, mostly very rural provinces, dominated by rural peasant society, and get very urbanized provinces, mostly Upper and Lower Silesia. So the Poles, as new inhabitants of this cities, felt double alienation. Firstly, is a sociological alienation because of this urban environment was completely alien for this native rural one. So it's a very sociological perspective. And cultural perspective is that most of the city, with few exceptions, have nothing common with Polish culture. For example, Szczecin will be discussed in this case. So despite the communist propaganda, most of them have nothing common with Polish culture. So these new inhabitants, Polish migrants, feel alienation, and for a long time, sociologists said that it could be 1-2 generation. People in these cities live in transition between the lost paradise and native villages and unwanted cities they live. The situation changed at the beginning of 21st century when you can observe in Poland the intensive process of inventing urbanity, not only in this western part of Poland, but in many of Polish cities. This is a quite complicated process. I just only want to highlight two, in my opinion, very important variables which stimulate this process. The first is in urban studies. I am representing urban studies. In urban studies, last 2 decades we describe as a process of renewal of the city. This is because city, this is correlating with the transformation on economy of city. Industrial city starting to be post-industrial city, for the city starting to post for the city. Shortly, it means that a new base of economy is a creative economy, is a creative class, is a creative city, is a city tourism, and every economy which could be described as a post-Fordist. Very good described by American sociologist Sharon Zukin. Sharon Zukin defined this economy like a symbolic economy. What is important that this new model of economy, multiculturalism and cultural diversity, is a rather golden opportunity than a threat. So, Polish city starting to recreate this cultural diversity in order to promote tourism, in order to promote an idea of creative city, creative class, and etc. And another, in my opinion, a very important aspect is the rise of new social agents in Poland from the beginning of the new century, so-called new bourgeoisie and urban social movements, for whom there's a first generation in Poland, this new bourgeoisie and social movement, that urbanity start to constitute a significant framework of reference for their identity. So this new bourgeoisie and social urban movement start to invading urbanity for themselves. Okay, this was a very short introduction to the context, and now I want to discuss 3 case studies. Gdańsk. Gdańsk could be described, according to well-known theory of French anthropologist Pierre Nora, as a lieu of la mémoire, because Gdańsk is a very specific example, because all of these cases have the strongest link with the Polish culture, Polish politics, Polish history from its very beginning. Unlike the other 2 cities, Gdańsk developed in Polish region, it's mean Kashubian region, so it's very important for the migration that many of new inhabitants of Gdańsk came from the Kashubian region, so Gdańsk was not such alien city like Wrocław or Szczecin. And what is also important, that Gdańsk was the first Polish city which publicly discussed the role of the German culture in shaping contemporary identity. This is especially, of course, the writing of Günter Grass, and especially the very famous in Poland, the movie The Teen Drummer. And this movie, these novels trigger a very important interest in local elites in so-called Heimat literature. So Gdańsk was the first city in Poland which started to discuss a forgotten past, forgotten German past, even before the fall of Iron Curtain and the political transformation in the 19th century. But on the other hand, in parallel to these processes, the German heritage, excuse me, the German heritage was and still, in fact, still is, perceived Gdańsk as a typical example of difficult heritage of contested legacy. Why? Because Gdańsk is widely perceived as a symbol of the outbreak of the Second War and aggression Nazi German against Poland. And Westerplatte, defense of Westerplatte, is probably one of the most important myths in Polish mythology, very deeply rooted. And of course, the Westerplatte is placed in Gdańsk. Another very important issue is that Gdańsk in Polish mythology is also perceived like a symbol of, in commas of course, eternal Polish-German conflict dating back to the Middle Ages when Poland competed with the Teutonic Order for this city. And in Polish mythology, probably Teutonic Order and the Westerplatte probably is the most important, the symbol which construct Polish identity. So, therefore, the Gdańsk is, in fact, as a typical model of, according to the Nora, is a year of the memoir, when the myth of the eternal Polish-German conflict is embodied. So, in such a case, referring to the German heritage, the German history of the city, especially in the right-wing discourse, is facing with accusation of the Germanization of city or even Nazification. The case of the next story came from the Wrocław, and this is a very different story. Wrocław could be described as a palimpsest, as a city of palimpsest. Because the history of Wrocław and this, especially the statehood, is the most complicated of the three discussed cases. In my opinion, of course, a long story to describe the identity of cities. So, sorry. I choose just, in my opinion, just the most important issue. In my opinion, the very important redefine, the very important book who redefined the history of Wrocław was the book written by British scholars, Norman Davies and Roger Moorhouse, Microcosmo, the portrait of Central European city. And this book go beyond the dichotomic version between Polish Wrocław and German Breslau. So please look at this, the following chapters of this book showing that Wrocław belongs to the different states. And what is important, when Wrocław belongs to the different state, the name of the city was changed. The name of the city is crucial for the constructive their identity. So the British historians show that Wrocław couldn't be perceived like an eternal struggle between German and Poles. It's a typical Central European city. It's a typical palimpsest belonging to different states and changing the name. And even the German history in Wrocław, the name of Breslau, is just 200 years. The Polish history is less than 70 years. So there's a very short period in the 100 history of the city. Another quite interesting book, very important for Wrocław, is a book by German historian Georg Thum, who highlights that the name of street, bridges, and square in Wrocław in the 19th century changed 5 times. For identity of city, the name of streets, the name of squares is very important. So the question is, there's a one Polish or German history? No. So city of Wrocław could be described as a city of palimpsest. Of course, for construction of new identity, new city's identity, also important issue is the myth of origin and the role of institution and the role of new narratives. The myth of origin in Wrocław is very important. There's a great flood in 1997. It's some kind of paradox that the catastrophe could be very important for sociological reason for integrate society. And for people in Wrocław, the great flood in 19th century is indicate like the myth of the origin that inhabitants of Wrocław, after this flood, starting to perceive Wrocław as their own city, they starting to feel like citizens of Wrocław, not just inhabitants. So they, after this, people in Wrocław starting to also different value the heritage in the city, starting to perceive the heritage of the city like their heritage for people of Wrocław. Another important issue is the role of institutions. In my opinion, just only one example, the role of university. University is a universal. University is beyond the boundaries, beyond the state boundaries, beyond the nation boundaries, beyond the ethnic boundaries. and University of Wrocław, referring to the content history with the German university, so showing that this university stay in the same city with different state, but this is the same institution. And very important is the highlighting the role of 9 Nobel Prize winners from the pre-war Breslau, who live and work in Breslau. So the role of institution, in my opinion, is very important. If we compare this situation with the Szczecin, I will be discussed in the last part of my presentation. And also, in my opinion, but very important new narratives is a crime story by Marek Krajewski. This crime story was really a boom for the history of pre-war Wrocław. And when I did research in the Wrocław, my respondent told me that they feel like a tourist with this crime story. They go through the city streets and go through the city street with the books of Marek Krajewski, The Forgotten City. So this very popular in Wrocław crime stories create a new narratives which can familiarize inhabitants with the past history. And the next case study comes from Szczecin. Szczecin could be described like a city beyond the history, escaped from the thinking about the future. Problem with the Szczecin is that among this 3 studied city, Szczecin had the weakest link with the Polish state, at the beginning of Polish statehood and a very short period Szczecin belongs to the Polish state. So there's no social memory about the connection with Szczecin and the Polish culture and the Polish state. And also, what is very important, Szczecin was not, during the Longue-Durée period, was not placed in the Polish-German borderland, like, for example, Gdańsk or Wrocław. So there's for centuries, there's not culture exchange, economic exchange, political exchange. So after 1945, Szczecin was completely alien for Poles who settled in the city. Another problem was the unstable situation after Szczecin after the 1945. So it influenced on the very specific structure of migration, because Szczecin for sometimes belonged to the Germans, sometimes was dominated by Red Army, and so this the status was unstable. And also, in my opinion, very important that in Poland after 1945, official propaganda tried to construct a new myth of Poland and Polishness. And for this propaganda, it's a very success. Still today, in Poland, we perceive Poland and Polishness placed between 2 rivers. The Bug at the east and the Oder at the west. So Szczecin's place on the western bank, on the Oder, so for the Polish national identity on the wrong side. So it's very difficult to construct a new identity when you exclude for the symbolic view of the Polishness placed between Oder and the Bug River. Another very important problem in the reconstruction of identity in Szczecin is symbolism of urban space. In contrast to Wrocław and Gdańsk, when the downtown was rebuilt, Szczecin, after the damage during the period of the war, was rebuilt in the spirit of modernism. Modernism is historical. And still today, Szczecin have a very serious problem with creation a symbolic center of the city, because this reconstruction of the city is in the spirit of modernism, modernism historical, with any reference to the city's history. And another problem is a completely lack of narratives make the past the city, creating a new myth of the origin. So, In my opinion, we observe in Szczecin quite interesting situation that the official brand called Floating Garden 2050 is when this brand was introduced was criticized. But in my opinion, it's quite a good, new narrative for Szczecin. According to this concept, Szczecin in 2005 should become a city with a high quality of life using these advantages, water and greenery. And this strategy completely don't refer to the history of the city, because the history of the city is still difficult. So Szczecin go beyond the history. Szczecin could, maybe it's a very good strategy that Szczecin will be as some kind of Dubai on the Baltic Sea without reference to the difficult history. So maybe this is a very good strategy for the city. So coming to the conclusions, as I try to show that the attitudes to the heritage depends on the one hand on the context and on the other hand on the actors and institutions which could create or recreate this heritage. And what is also very important, that even we discuss the case study came from the same state. Poland is a very homogeneous country. We observe three different contexts, two different attitudes to the same German heritage. Depends on the context and the actors, institutions and social actors. This, in my opinion, this indicates that if we discuss social memory, we clearly see that the social memory is very democratic. So it's that the social memory is creating in the local context, not ideological context. So if we discuss the social memory, we should put special attention on the local context. And thank you for attention.
Thank you, Paweł. Thank you, Paweł. That was perfect in time. We started 10 minutes later, and you perfect till the last second did it. Our next speaker is Bartłomiej Krzysztan. He's assistant professor at the Institute of Political Studies of the Polish Academy of Sciences. He graduated of political science at Université Libre de Brussels and cultural studies and political studies at the University of Wrocław. His research interests are political anthropology, political and cultural memory, postcolonialism, ethnic and national identities, critical discourse analysis, and contemporary political developments in the post-Soviet space, mainly the South Caucasus region. I think that's today about. Just to name two of his publications, published a book on memory, the political power representations of collective memory in Georgia, Armenia, Abkhazia, and Nagorno-Karabakh, and is co-author of the book Politics, the Political Borders of Discourse, and we are happy to listen to your talk on From Recovered to Uncovered, Colonialism and Imperiality in the Eastern Borderlands and the Recovered Territories in Comparative Perspectives. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So let me explain myself first, because after this introduction it might sound a little bit strange that I'm going to talk about Eastern Borderlands and recovered territories. As far as my expertise mainly covers the post-Soviet countries, mostly in the South Caucasus, but generally this is the, let's say, the new interest of mine, which I'm trying to research through the angle of the theory and methodology which was already developed during my study of the South Caucasus. The other thing is that when Lucas sent me for the first time the preliminary draft of the program of this event, I was thinking that This is not the greatest spot for me to stand because mostly we are going to talk probably about the Russian imperialism and the consequences for Central and Eastern Europe, and also about the German colonialism towards the Central and Eastern Europe. And I will come and I will be talking about how the Poles were those bad guys. So maybe that's not the greatest idea to do so in here, but on the other hand, it's opening, I guess, for the discussion about how the imperial and colonial discourses were present during the period of the Second Polish Republic and right after the Second World War. So first of all, a few words about the state of us. What's always very curious to me is the question that there is like broad literature developing every year on the question of the coloniality and post-coloniality of the Eastern Borderlands. Here on the slide, you might see just a few examples coming from works of Ładykowski, from the perspective of political anthropology, historians like Daniel Beauvoir, or like Professor Bakua, the literary experts. On the other hand, we got developing. I got some doubts about the precise implementation of the post-colonial ideas towards the recovered territory. Nevertheless, they do exist in Polish academic expertise on the coloniality as post-coloniality of the recovered territory. And in compare to what is written about the Eastern Borderlands, about the recovered territories, still the most of the scholarship is produced by literary studies. So there is not much written down by political scientists and by historians on the recovered territories. I have some idea why, but I will leave it till the end of my discussion. And then there is also quite a lot written about the idea of imperiality. In Poland, there is obviously very deeply rooted in Marxist critics perspective of Jan Sowa. We also have like quite old writings about of Kieniewicz. Also, there are some new works related to the relation between the Poland and Ukraine of the, for example, Elżbieta Kwiecińska. Coming to this, I was just wondering why there is no comparison. And as far as I'm coming first from the political science, I was wondering why, if we have two different borderlands, two different historical experiences, why basically there are no such a study which are trying to compare those two experiences. So my idea is to attempt to juxtapose this rarely compared, if compared at all, phenomena of the borderland experience and try to inscribe them within the framework of post-colonial and post-imperial studies to find out some similarities and limitations, and at least if the comparison is not entirely valuable, fruitful, it will at least give us some maybe possible interesting theoretical matrix. So I just thought about some theses which might be the beginning of this reflection. And my idea was that the colonial and imperial narrative of the Second Polish Republic about the pre-war Eastern Borderlands have their analogies in the narratives about the post-war Western and Northern territories. I should mention that at the very beginning, because I'm just using sometimes the phrase recovered territories, but I should say the so-called recovered territories, because when I'm saying recovered territories, I'm already using the ideological language of the communist propaganda from the afterwar period. So let's say that in my mind, when I'm saying the recovered territories, I always have in mind this neutral, let's say, term, which is Western and Northern territories. But as we know, like reading Woolf, and we know from the imagined geographies, it's always depending from which perspective you are looking at the things. So when I will say trans Olza, please, it's not the saying of the Polish imperiality towards something which lives beyond Olza from the Polish perspective, but just the usage of the term, which is understandable for all of us. So, as I said, I was trying to inscribe those comparative perspective from my previous studies when I was doing the comparison of the mnemonic discourses in the South Caucasus using the reflection of cultural hegemony. Also, as far as I was studying very much the conflicts of memory between Georgian and Abkhaz and between the Azerbaijanis and Armenians, the concept which I found like really interesting is the concept of the agonistic memory. So when we do not have possibility to create culture of memory which is based on pluralism, which is also not entirely based on the antagonistic approaches, maybe the only idea is to look for the agonistic memory, so recalling the works of Chantal Mouffe, I mean the interpretation on the Chantal Mouffe within the memory studies. And what I'm doing, like studying the language of propaganda of Second Polish Republic and the Polish People's Republic right after the Second World War, it's to following the traces of what Althusser was calling ideological state apparatuses. So these more subtle ways of imputing power, especially on language, in which we are discussing particular phenomena. As I said, this is mostly the study of language of power. I'm just trying to find out where is this the most important for political scientists, distinction between the agency and the structure. And I think like that it has some heuristic value to study of the continuity, because very often when we talk about the Polish history of the 20th century, we are talking about the moments of when something was done and finished. So we are talking about 1939, the Second Polish Republic was done, and then we are moving forward to 1989, and the Polish People's Republic was done. So we are not looking for the traces of this continuity of language. What it brings to the broader picture, I suppose, is just this possibility to make the comparative analysis of the borderlands and to study analogy and continuity in language. I was trying to get into different sources. So first of all, it's obviously the political and academic intellectual discourse on it, especially the ideological discourse created by the Polish communists after the Second World War. And here there is a very important notion. Because I'm going to talk about the documents which were created before the moment when Władysław Gomułka was arrested. So that's the moment, because very often when we talk and when I hear about how the Polish history of this period is inscribed, we are thinking about the Stalinism as the most important period. And in my assessment, especially towards the Western and Northern territories, the Stalinism as the most important point of reference begin later in 1949. So when I will be talking about that, we have like a very strong Polish agency before this moment. I was also reading some reportages of very well-known writers, also mentioned yesterday, like Sawery Pruszyński, for example, who was traveling, then Wanda Menzel. The guys mostly forgotten nowadays outside of the literary circles. And also I will tell you a few things about one of the cult classics of Polish cinema, but that will come in the moment. So first of all, to just talk about this comparison, we need to talk a little bit about this idea of Eastern borderlands. First of all, we have to remember that it's a very retroactive term. So according to Żurawski-Welgrajewski, that was first time mentioned by Wincenty Pol in 1854. So we see that it's very romantic vision, which was later inscribed as the political and state ideology after the 1918. So if we are talking of the Eastern borderlands, we have to talk about all having in mind the Second Polish Republic. Very often in political documents, but also in cultural artifacts, the Eastern borderlands are described in this very romantic vision, even though the Romanticism as a period of the in the literature is already long gone. But on the second hand, the people like Grażyna Borkowska or Bogusław Bakuła, they are writing also that in this romantic vision there is very big space for discussion on Polonization and colonization of the Eastern borderlands, especially Wołyń and Eastern Galicia. And then, when we are talking about the Eastern borderlands from today's perspective, what is very important is the fact that Eastern borderlands are existing in this Polish habitus somehow as some crucial lost lands. So it's very similar to the way how the Western post-colonial powers perceiving the lost overseas colonies. Then, also, what we very often forgot when we are not inscribing the post-colonial studies within the history, Eastern Borderlands is very much political reality. And here I will just present you two important political documents from the period. So first of all, you see on the below these 2 points, you see this is the law from the July 1920 about the agricultural reform, which gave the way to something which was called the military settlements of the Eastern Borderlands. Military settlements done by Polish soldiers who were participating in Polish Bolshevik War of 1920, so they have the ability to buy lands in Eastern Borderlands cheaper, and sometimes they were receiving these lands for free, which was the very typical process of colonial settlements of the lands, which were not before that occupied by Poles, or they were abandoned by Poles, and they were very often described in such manner. And the second law, which you see here, is also something which is talking about this possibility of the settlements, but on the other hand is considering the Eastern Borderlands also as a very important strategic part of the Second Polish Republic. When we are talking about the idea of the post-colonial and recovered territories, what is the most important factor is that in compared to the Eastern Borderlands, this is the proactive term. So the recovered territories, it's not something which was created after something happened, like the partition of Poland was the cause which created the retroactive term of the Eastern Borderlands, but it was proactive term to distribute it to confirm the Polish agency. And what is very interesting, the traces of this Polishness of the recovered territories, of the Western and Northern territories, and also the Upper Silesia, we can see already in the pre-First World War writings, like, for example, Leon Wasilewski political documents. And what Leon Wasilewski was writing was quite important because it was substantial for the political agenda of the Piłsudski circle. And Leon Wasilewski, for a moment, was also the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Second Polish Republic. So what he was writing was very much later put into action when he was acting as a politician. Also, this idea of recovering something was very present in the 1920s when Poland gained the access to the Baltic Sea. So also in many political writings we can see this word that the Baltic Sea was recovered and retaken by Poland. And politically it's very important to remember that for the first time this term politically in the specific law which was introduced was used by President Mościcki in 1938, right after Trans-Olza was taken and, from Czechoslovakia after the Munich conference. I will tell you about two artifacts, let's say. The first one is the political. This is the catalog of Wystawa Ziem Odzyskanych, the exhibition which took place in Wrocław in 1948. And during this exhibition, that was the moment when the newly established People's Power in Poland wanted to present the successes of 3 years of Polish rules over the Western and Northern territories in former Breslau, in Wrocław. In this huge exhibition, you could see all the traces of modernization and establishment of the Polish rules over that. That was obviously very ideological reconstruction. So when we are looking at this document, at the very beginning, we got like introductory words first from Bolesław Bierut, the president of Polish People's Republic, Władysław Gomułka, who was the minister for the recovered territories, from Józef Cyrankiewicz, who was the prime minister, for Hilary Minc, who was the minister of economy at that time. And in these speeches, what is the most important, I suppose, is that this political idea of Polish belonging to the recovered territories and the recovered territories belonging to Poland is the question of historical justice. So it's very much inscribed is this idea that bringing the recovered territory back, it's historical justice of the Polish People's Republic. And what is very important is this agency. So keeping and securing the power and rule over the recovered territories is something which is securing the peace, not only between the Poland and Germany, but all over Europe. And this is a very much repeated sentence which we can find there. And the second artifact is more cultural. This is the cult classic which I was talking about. I don't know whether you've seen this movie. If you don't, this is one of the best movies ever made in Poland, ever. Not only during the People's Polish Republic, but ever. This is The Law and Fist, Prawo and Pięść, directed by Jerzy Hoffman and Edward Skórzewski, and written by Józef Hen, what is also important and should be mentioned here. And this is one of the rare examples of the Polish cinematography using the genre which was generally called Ostern, quite popular in German People's Republic as far as I know, and quite popular also in the Soviet Union, especially in the 50s and 60s when these kind of movies were written down and made to present the Russian conquest of the Central Asia, which is very colonial as well, in a way. And what is very interesting in this movie and how it's depicting what I'm talking about is the question of this ideological fight with the looting of the recovered territories. So there is this good character, like all of these characters in this socio-realistic movie are very typical and archetypical. So we got the character which is like fighting against looting bad guys. On the second layer, he's also establishing the Polish power over those places. So this Wild West is taken over and there is a process of deteutonization. By the way, this term is very often used in the political documents as well. And we can see that as this justified establishment of the political sovereignty and control over newly incorporated territories. Going into comparison between these two, I just give you at the very top of this, I'm sorry for the small letters, comparison between the two political figures from the completely different wars. Not entirely completely different because they're coming from the same party, basically. So Józef Piłsudski on the left and Józef Cyrankiewicz on the right. So when Piłsudski was talking about the military settlements in Eastern Borderlands, he said, I have already proposed to the government that the part of the acquired land should become the property of those who made it Polish, having enriched it with Polish blood and enormous effort. The translations are mine, so please forgive me if they are not that nice. This land, tired of the sowing of bloody war, is waiting for the sowing of peace, waiting for those who will turn the sword into plowshare, and I would like you to achieve as many peace victories in this future work as you had in combat work. So taking over the land is something like a battle. There are no people there. There is just land. We are just coming and we are taking this land, we are acquiring it, and we are taking it over. So nobody's mentioning that there are many Ukrainians, Belarusians, and the people with this borderlands identity called in Poland Tutejsi, for example. This is especially the case of Polesia. On the right side, we can see like very similar way of describing the recovered territories by Józef Cyrankiewicz, prime minister back then, the longest serving prime minister of the Polish People's Republic. Only thanks to the concept and policy of the democracy camp in Poland, this historic act of historical justice could be fulfilled before our eyes, at the same time becoming one of the foundation of peace. And in the following sentence, he's also saying about these Poles coming to the recovered territories and bringing civilization, basically, to these places. In the case of Eastern Borderlands, definitely we can talk about this mission civilisatrice, the way how Second Polish Republic was describing Eastern Borderlands is very much similar to the British and French discourses of the overseas colonies. In the West, we are talking about the modernity, but I suppose that in this case, it's more related to the communist ideology, which was very modern, and the question of modernity and industrialization was the crucial point for establishing this power, than the question of colonization. In the Polish Eastern Borderlands, lost by Poland during the partitions, those places which later became the Eastern Borderlands, from the perspective of the Russian Empire, which was not brought here and is quite important, was perceived as Wazrysienie ad Polsce. So the territories which were taken from Poland and they came back to the Russian core. So in some way, the Second Polish Republic used this concept like other way around to bring back these territories again. And then we see the traces of the similar language of propaganda when we are talking about the recovered territories. Eastern borderlands very often are depicted also as the frontier between the civilization and the Bolshevik barbarism. So Sławomir Łotys, in his very nice book about Polesia, he is writing about this strategic value of the eastern borderlands, because we are not industrializing them like entirely, because this is something which is making a division between civilized Europe and the barbarism which is coming from the east. And in similar manner, also the border on the Oder and Lusatian Nysa, is described in the communist propaganda after the war as a border of peace in Europe. We have also the idea of xenonostalgia, Kresonostalgia, I'm sorry, so the nostalgia towards the eastern borderlands, and is very much inscribed in this way how Svetlana Boym was describing the nostalgia as something like longing for home that no longer exists, and what is more important, has never existed, because the way how the eastern borderlands are described today and depicted today has nothing to do with the political and historical reality of these lands. And a similar way can be regarded towards the recovered territories. And in the end, the Eastern Borderland is a great myth, which has to be dealt with historically. And this great myth partly abolished with the collapse of the Polish People's Republic. I know that my time is gone, so I'll just see what I can skip. The last thing. I was looking for some comparison from the other part of the world, because that's what the people within the postcolonial studies do. And this language, especially regarding the recovered territories, but also Eastern borderlands, is very similar to the language of the Manifest Destiny, the American expansionism in the West in the 19th century. So first of all, this language is something like sanctified act. So what we do as Poles on these territories is something which is sanctified by some extraterrestrial or power. Then this is manifest because it's obvious. This is what we are about to do. This is what we are going to do. Nobody going to stop us. This is our agency, and we are going to do it. And then there is a destiny, so it's certain that actually because of this transitional justice, because of this historical justice, after different ideas coming from the other colonial power, so from Germany in the form of Drachna-Holstein, and from Wielkoruski or Wielkodzierżawny chauvinism, so the Russian idea, we have the right to do it, so it's certain that we are going to do it. In the writings about, few more words, in the writings about the recovered territories, very often there is the word Ostflucht appearing, and they are just trying to explain historically that actually Drang nach Osten was not the idea which was just ideological, but during the 20s and the 30s, a lot of Germans were leaving the western and northern territories of Poland after the Second World War. So it was something like it began before, so it was not just the Polish responsibility that the Germans has to leave those places. Very often we have also this very recalling of the words which are reminding us the agricultural language. So when we are talking about the land, we are taming the land. There is a sedimentation of the people on this land, and there is an assimilation, but in this very agricultural meaning. And what is very interesting in both of these cases, especially in the case of the recovered territories, is very huge hegemony of discourse in it, because even the people like Bolesław Kominek, who was the first archbishop of the Wrocław Archbishopry, who was really against the communist power in Poland, even him, he was talking with the same language of power of the Polish People's Republic. All right, so that's it. Thank you, and sorry for took too long.
Thank you very much, Krzysztan, for this fascinating talk and for being in time. And our third speaker is Professor Hermann Mückler, an ethnologist, ethnohistorian, and political scientist from the University of Vienna. He did his doctoral thesis on Taukai and Wulagi, causes of political instability in Fidjis, habilitated on change and erosion of traditional power structures in Fiji. He conducted a lot of field research in the Asian Pacific region, founded the Austrian South Pacific Society, and is editor of the book series Novara, Beiträge zur Pazifikforschung, and the book series Ozeanien. And we are very happy to listen to your talk. It will be in English. We never had colonies, Habsburg colonial ambitions in Eastern Europe, and about what to do with this heritage. Floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege for me to be here. And I only found out when I got the program that most of the presentations here are in English. So originally I proposed this in German, so I switched it now to English. So if you don't mind, I speak English now here. And I called it, wir haben nie Colonialismus betrieben. We never practiced colonialism. If you would ask the average Austrian about colonial, if we were a colonial power, most of the people would say, no, definitely no. Why? We had no overseas empire and so. And yes, I see this in the continuation of a typical Austrian reaction to some historical periods and also of the rejection of any kind of guilt, for instance, during the Nazi era. Yeah, it took until the 1980s, yeah, and the so-called Waldheim affair, the former United Nations Secretary Kurt Waldheim, who then became president of Austria, and his involvement during the Nazi time, that all these things came up. So in Germany this was decades earlier than it took place in Austria. So now if we look back even more to the Austrian-Hungarian Empire now, it is the question if Austria was a colonial power. Two ways, yeah. We have to discuss this, but maybe you would also ask why I am talking here, and most of the presentations here are focusing on the German-Polish relationship, on Germany in the East here. But Austria was at that time when it acquired its eastern provinces, Galicia, Lodomeria, Bukovina, it was part of the Holy Roman Empire. So there was a link to Germany. That's one point. And the second point is that during the three partitions of Poland, in two of them, Austria took part of it, in the first one and in the third partition here. And it was also in Austria, it was a narrative and it was also a discourse on always comparing how we treated the people there and how it was done in the Prussian part, and how it was done in the Russian part here. Yeah, and we always said, well, I say we, as I'm an Austrian now, I generalize it now a little bit. We always said, well, what we did in Galicia, Lodomeria, and Bukovina, it was some sort of cozy colonialism. It was much nicer than what the Russians have done to the Polish people, and even what the Prussians have done to the people. So that's the context why I'm here, and I hope we can switch this now. What do I have to? Okay. Good. Here we see the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. So we were talking before about colonialism and imperiality and eastern borderlands, the previous speaker here. Yes, for Austria, these areas, Galicia, Lodomeria, Bukovina, were our eastern borderlands. Yeah, and I'm talking a little bit also here now about the culture of remembrance, I would say it here. But colonialism and Austria. Okay. Yes, even Austria was practicing overseas colonialism, also much far not to the extent as the British, the French, and in the late 19th century then the Germans. We have here an image of the Nicobar Islands, who were a very short period of time they were Austrian. And it was also typical Austrian how this continued. This colony was forgotten by Austria, by the Austrian government, really forgotten. Yeah? in that way. And then the Danish took over, and then the British took over here, and from Trieste, these enterprises started here. So that's the thing. If we talk about Austrian-Hungarian overseas colonialism, we would mention a very short and a very small settlement in today's Mozambique, in the Lagoa Bay, and also maybe the project of establishing a colony in North Borneo here. That would be, beside the Nicobar Island, would be the overseas colony. So how is it now about inner European or internal colonialism of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire? Usually this is only applied, the term colonialism, to Bosnia-Herzegovina, and that only was practiced in the very late 19th and in the early 20th century, that Bosnia was really seen as some sort of colony. But this term was never applied to eastern, to the borderlands in the northeast of the western part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, which was called Cisleitanian, compared to Transleitanian. And Leitanian means Leiter. Leiter is a small mountain range, which actually is more a hill than a range, yeah? But it really divided these two entities, and one was then more ruled by Vienna and the other one later on by Hungarians. And so we only have here, if we talk in Austria about colonialism, about inner European colonialism, we would only talk about Bosnia. But let me get back now to the eastern borderlands, because in the not only in the scientific literature, it's now really critically reflected, but in the literature you can find it, that we call it der ferne Osten. Yeah, so it is, okay, why is this here? Sorry, okay, I can go back, so that way, yeah, der ferne Osten here, okay. It is the Far East, yes, and I see here, okay, yeah, it's the German version here now. Okay, it's the Far East, and it is far from a viewpoint of the capital city of Vienna. It took 26 hours to go to Czernivtsi in Bukovina, and also almost 18 hours to go to Lemberg, today's Lviv here. Okay. So that's the area I'm talking about. I'm not talking about West Galicia, because that was only for a very short period of time. It was part of the new provinces of Galicia and Lodomeria. Just to mention it, in 1772, Galicia became, after the first Polish partition, the biggest part became Austrian, and then later on there were parts added to that, and it became the Kingdom of Galicia and Lodomeria in 1804. And then in 1867, after the so-called Ausgleich, it was called Crown Land of the Cisleitanian part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire here. So we have it here. So if we talk about how it is reflected in Austria now, we have to, then it's always seen as it's the part where we have a lot of, we have the biggest ethnic heterogeneity in the whole Austrian-Hungarian Empire appeared in Galicia and in the Bukovina here. We had the Lipovans there, that was a Russian religious minority. We had the Jews, we had Armenians, we had the Ruthenians, the Ukrainians. We had Hutzul people, we had Boyken, Lemken. We had Germans and we had Austrians there, but the biggest group were Polish people, of course, in this area. And we were talking before about yesterday and today was several times mentioned what I would summarize under the term Deutschtum in these regions here. And I think it's the irony, and it's also the tragedy, that it were the Jewish people who really promoted the Deutschtum. It were the Jewish people who were interested. There were German newspapers in the coffee houses in Czernivtsi, Czernowitz, or in Lemberg, Lviv at that time. Yeah? It was not the Austrians. Actually, the Austrians, and also this term was already mentioned here, the Polonization here, yeah? Many Austrians who went there, especially military personnel, after their service, they went to the east and they received their posts in the administration there. But most of these people then, they were not the carrier of the German or the Austrian culture into these eastern borderlands, because many of these people then took Polish women as wives and then changed and became Polonized. So for Austria, they reacted to that and accepted that, and that's why also then later it was called that Austria practiced some sort of cozy colonialism, because they had to react, because this Polonization was there, that Polish was the predominant, not only the language, but also their culture, and then of course also their move to more nationalistic movements appeared there. So if we, in Austria, we talk about Galicia, about Bukowina, it's some sort of romantic memories, it's some sort of romantic transfiguration. Most of these stories have some sort of sad, well, it's so sad that we lost that, and it was so, culturally, it was so intense and interesting, especially the Jewish culture. That's interesting. If we talk about Galicia and Austria, mostly it's linked to the Jewish culture because of Deutschtum, yeah, so the language here, but not so much, or almost not, to what the Polish achievements in this region here. So it's our Austrian, some sort of Orientalism. Edward Said was mentioned today already here in the Far East. Okay, I see here, this is the presentation now, still the German one. Actually, I switched to an English one, but this disappeared somehow. Okay, no, nobody here to react. Okay, so I have no translation now of because I switched yesterday evening to an English presentation. Okay, in Vienna we have now. Come on, it's not me. Ah, okay, that's you. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so here we have it now, the English version. Okay, in Vienna, it's only the last 2 decades that this region really is of interest, and we have now, only the last few years, we have this Vienna Galicia studies with a lot of publications now who try to bring this more in to give it more visibility. Yeah, here we can see it here, and this is today in close relation, in close cooperation with Polish experts here, and especially with people from the Polish Academy of Science here, who really, the old map that was in the end of the 18th century, early 19th century, there was a survey made, a cartographic survey of the whole Austrian eastern borderlands, and thanks to the Polish Academy of Science, this appeared now as a whole book series, but you can also access it online. That's really interesting. That's really beautiful, and thanks to this. That was a Polish-Austrian cooperation. Another access to the region and to give it more visibility to a broader audience in Austria are exhibitions. For instance, this one, quite recent, at the Wiener Volkskundemuseum, the Vienna Folklore Museum, called Oil Rush and the Cult of the Huzuls. Well, we can remember that in Galicia it was important, economically important for Austria because of its oil in the area around Drohobitz, for instance. Yeah? In the late 19th century, thus the Austrian-Hungarian Empire was the 4th biggest oil producer in the world, besides the US and Canada and the Netherlands Indies at that time here. Actually, the second important product for export was timber. timber from the northern slopes of the Carpathian Mountains here, yeah, and most of this timber was also exported. So most of the timber used for building the Suez Canal came from the northern Carpathian slopes, and it were companies by the Rothschild companies who transported that from the Carpathes through Austria to Trieste, and from there through the Mediterranean Sea to be used for the building of the Suez Canal. So this is a quite this was a quite recent exhibition at the Wiener Volkskunde Museum, who gives a little bit an impression of, yeah, what was Galicia and what could you find there at that time. And so in Austria, always I try to include this more now in the general discourse of what is colonialism. Yeah, if we're not talking only about overseas colonialism, but more about this inner European internal colonialism, border colonialism. We have a lot of terms for this, and if we really open up this, then of course what happened in Galicia and Bukovina was colonialism, yeah? And you can apply different terms as settlement colonies or economic colonies, military colonies. All three of these terms can be applied to Galicia and Bukovina. Yes, they were military colonies, yeah, because of the closeness to Tsaristic Russia, which was seen as a enemy and also competing in the whole area here. Yes, it was a settlement colony to some extent, and of course it was exploited economically. Yeah, so border colonialism is the term which we can apply. So here, and the importance of this sort of colonialism. I have here only a citation for Friedrich Ratzel, where he compared this sort of colonialism with other forms. And yes, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was a continental empire, so we practiced colonialism on our borderlands, as the Tsaristic Russia did, also as the Osmanic Empire did in that time, and so. Okay, and you see it was on the periphery. So if you deal with these questions, what is the theoretical background? The theoretical background can be here the center-periphery theory. You can deal with center-periphery, and it is the periphery. If you see here the main train tracks, and so then you see from Vienna to Lviv, Lemberg, and then to Czernowitz. It's really an area at that time, in terms of development, was remote here. Yeah, only recently we have now also MA and PhD works who deal with that. And still, but there's the question, is this now a colony or not? Yeah, the annexation of the Bukovina in 1775, was it a case of colonialism? Actually, to say the conclusion of this, yes, in this work it is called a case of colonial. And we also had, and that was the first, actually that was the beginning, and that's more than 20 years ago, that was the beginning, how and if we can talk if the Habsburg monarchy was a place of what we call inner colonialism here. And that were the main questions who were discussed in a workshop that time. And that was the beginning in Austria to deal with these questions here now. Okay, we can also find it in the literature, of course. There are references, many references, where people saw and wrote about these regions as colonies, and one of them is Gregor von Rezori, an Austrian author who grew up. Actually, he grew up in the 1920s and 30s. At that time, it wasn't even a colony of Austria anymore. But still, he was complaining that all the Deutschtum, it faded out, it disappeared. And so it's a complaint of a disappearing world. And that's what you can find most in the literature. You can find this sad attitude here about that something disappeared here. So it's a romantic romantic memories, romantic transfiguration, what you have here. So in one of my seminars on colonialism, called it Colonialism's Postcolonial. I always say it in plural because colonialism has so many forms of appearance, also neocolonialisms. We made a small survey. Actually, this is not really in the narrow sense of the word scientific. I only ask the students, go out, ask your friends, your families, your parents, what do they know? Do they find that Austria was a colonial power? Yes or no? So it's not, we had the survey yesterday with 2,000 people. That's only 82 people who found out. And we have also to take into account that the majority of these people had an academic background. So you could expect that they know a little bit more maybe than the average Austrian if you just go on the road or you ask people in the supermarket or so. Yeah? But even here it's interesting to see how little, how many people really know about if Austria practiced colonialism, and it's also only few people know about Galicia and Bukovina at all here, yeah? And especially the third question, if we come to post-colonial theory and the responsibility from a today's viewpoint about what happened in the past, you can see here that this responsibility, well, it's not really accepted to take responsibility for these things. I have to come to an end. We are quite late, but now it is an issue. But only the last 3-4 years, I would say, it's really coming up. And that's when I got here the information about the symposium. I said, well, maybe it's good just to tell some words about what's going on in Austria now. And yes, Walter Sauer is an expert. Actually, he is an Africanist and dealing especially with Austrian involvement in African colonies on an individual basis of individual persons here. But he, in general, also deals with these colonial attitudes and the colonial history. So the whole story is something about romantic memories, about transfiguration, about falsification, about whitewashing, if you want to say it there this way. And, well, I think I'll leave it that way. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the fascinating talk. And now I would like to bring Paweł, Krzysztan, and Hermann to the chairs prepared. And the floor is open for questions. And I will take a microphone and give it to you. And I have to first switch it on. And we start here.
Thank you. I have some questions and some comments. I will start. First of all, thank you very much for all three presentations. They are also very closely linked, actually, and give much space for discussion. The first question to Paweł Kubicki: if you do your research on the cities, do you also think of the consequences of the self-government reform which took place 97-98 in Poland? Because it was observed in Wrocław, but I think also Szczecin and Gdańsk, how the cities simply, the city revival actually took place after this self-government reform took place. And you mentioned the flood in Wrocław in 97 as the turning point. For sure, it was a turning point. But before it happened, we had Mayor Zdrojewski, who is a sociologist, and he very consciously, firstly... Finished cultural studies. Okay. But he worked at the Institute of Sociology at Wrocław University. Okay. Now he's MP. Still, he very consciously explained that he decided to have the market square in Wrocław rebuilt, reconstructed, renovated, because he wanted to use it as a symbol which would unite a Polish Breslauer, which is a very difficult term, as we all know. So he wanted to create a space, a symbolic one, but also the real one, which would simply attract the people and show them that we can also be something new, like the Polish inhabitants on Wrocław. And it was at the same time. So this renovation was finished, I think, a month or two before the flood. And then the people, when they started to defend Wrocław, they wanted also to defend the market square. And the second thing you mentioned is the University of Wrocław and these anniversaries, like the establishment of the university, but there was also the second anniversary, 1811. And then it was the Prussian renewal of the university. And there were much controversies. Should we celebrate it or not? And the answer was, you know, it was a strange year for the university because we were celebrating and we were not celebrating at the same time. And it also presents some interpretation about how the Habsburg monarchy was seen and has been seen actually in Lower Silesia, even nowadays. If you go to one of the restaurants in this renewed market square in Warsaw, you will see Franz Josef on the wall, because it's the Lemberg restaurant, and then many people in Wrocław, they, like many Poles, they find Franz Josef extremely nice person. This is also the reflection of the difference in the perception of the Habsburg monarchy and Prussian monarchy. And this is one of the explanations why the University of Wrocław celebrated the 300 years anniversary, but not the 200 years anniversary of the renewal of the university. And it goes back to what you said about the differences in these ideas about Prussia and Germany as a colonizer and possibly Austria also as a colonizer. It has further consequences today. We have, for example, Austrian Institute in Wrocław, which was established some 5 years ago. In 2017, Austria established also Austrian Institute in Moscow, exactly at the time when the Russians were about to expel British Council, which they did eventually in 2018. But the main idea behind Austrian external cultural policy is to invest in the places of cultural neighborhood. So Wrocław, I think, still is seen as the cultural neighborhood. So it would be the hypothesis if there were no investments in Moscow, perhaps. At the same time, there is no Austrian Institute in Kiev. But the newly established Cultural Institute of Austria launched the Austrian, the cultural season. I'm about to finish. So they launched the season of Ukraine culture in Austria. It was actually the year of Austrian-Ukrainian culture in 2019, because they, of course, knew about the very strong links also in the field of culture between Russia and Austria. Sorry for too long.
Was comments in principle, so thank you for this, Dirk.
I've got a comment for Bartłomiej, Krzysztan. Thank you for bringing in a political science perspective in this discourse, which is, I totally agree with you, really dominated by literary scholars. I would propose a more interactive perspective. In a long-term research project, you enlisted Marta Podolczak's publication from 2012. She was my former assistant. We tried to bring into both German and Polish perspectives on the recovered territories. And my personal finding from this long-term project was that we see a kind of mutual orientalization of the population, of the newcomers, the resettlers, and of the remaining Germans, at least in a short period of transition when three groups were present: the Red Army, Polish resettlers, and still present German population. And I think, especially from a perspective of political science, it might be beneficiary to see how the groups mutually influence themselves and use, that's my thesis, colonialist attitudes or orientalist attitudes in this context.
May I answer right away? Yeah. Thank you very much. So, yeah, you are absolutely right. I suppose that it would be very valuable input, but I would add something to it, and in some way it's also the comment to the commentary of Professor Ociepka, because there was also the fourth group, because we had, like, first of all the Red Army, then we had the Germans who were not left yet. We had the people forcibly moved from the eastern borderlands coming, and that was not not intentional that I choose Lowen-Fist, because there were also a lot of people coming from the central Poland, from Świętokrzyskie, Łódzkie, etc., who were the settlers and who decided to move to recover territories not because they were forcibly moved by the Soviet army, by the Red Army, but they decided that they will look for the better life there. So this is the fourth group. And this fourth group is especially interesting because this is related to the university issue. Because those people coming from the eastern borderlands, including my family, for example, there were people coming from the intellectual circles, the people who were working at the universities in Lviv, who were working in the universities of Vilnius. So they were bringing this whole cultural capital to the city. But the cultural scientists from University of Wrocław, they did the research a couple of years ago, and they checked the numbers, and actually they were like absolute minority. It was less than 20% of people who came from the eastern borderlands, but they really deeply seeded this myth about Wrocław as the new Lviv and moving eastern borderlands towards the recovered territories. But most of the peoples, they were just settlers coming economically. And this group will be like really, really interesting to follow up. But yeah, but I absolutely agree with you. So thank you for this question. Yeah.
Can I answer to your question? I completely agree that the restoration of the main market in Wrocław is one of the most important issues in recreation of identity. Many of my respondents put showing that it is very important. And if we compare Wrocław and Szczecin still today have no symbolic center. Symbolic center is very important for construction's new identity. And another issue is the role of authorities in Wrocław is very important that Mr. Zdrojewski and Mr. Dudkiewicz is a very stable of mayors, two mayors, which was personally interest in the local Wrocław identity and put special attention to recreate this identity of the city. In contrast, in Szczecin, the authority was unstable, and there was when Poland joined the EU in Szczecin, there was one mayor very anti-German. So this is very important. That is very difficult to recreate local identity and dealing with the German heritage when authorities is anti-German. It's a completely different situation in Wrocław when local authorities was very stable and personally interesting in the identity of Wrocław.
Okay. I want only to say something for the previous comment on that. Yes, we do not have a cultural institute in Kiev right now, but I was only recently at a meeting of the Österreich Bibliotheken, the Austrian libraries, and I think they have now opened an office in Kiev. That's just to add that here. May I pose a question? I only want to ask you what you told about Szczecin, to wipe out really the history of a whole city, yeah? Does in the city exist a Szczecin city museum? Every city I know, every town has a museum which keeps the records of the history. Does this city also have this? And then that's the question.
Yeah, of course. I have no idea which exposition is today. So.
Okay.
Boats, for example.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing. We are talking about the post-colonialism in here, so please just use the word, like proper name of the capital of Kiev, of Ukraine, Kiev, not Kiev, because it's a Russian word, all right. So this is the first thing. And the second one, what do you mean by saying recreate identity? Recreate, it's recreate something from something what existed before. And I mean, like in Wrocław, it was not the recreation of identity, it was creation of identity to get rid of this communist propaganda myth of the recovered territory, etc. So what was recreated? Recreated from what? From Piast's story of the Wrocław, or from what?
From a very difficult history, from the very big recreation identity means that we use some history, inventing this, recreating the history and the past for using the history in the very particular today reason. So it's not creation anew, but it's always recreation. Reinterpretation of the history. It means it's a reinterpretation of history.
So thank you very much for all 3 papers. They were. It's okay. So it was very interesting. I'm deep in the research about post-German material culture and not only material culture. So I will play Advocatus Diaboli now, because the German language you have said, Polish, Breslauer, these German names are codes for the newcomers. If you ask somebody, where do you come from? They answer, I'm from Breslau, not from Wrocław. So Breslau is like a cultural code. It's the same in Allenstein or Ratzenburg. This is in Masuria. But the question is about cultural appropriation. This is a kulturelle Aneignung. It is about the celebrations in Breslau or Wrocław. Like, for example, 100 years of radio. It was criticized in the capital city where I come from, that these 100 years were not your 100 years, but also Germans. So is it right to celebrate not the radio that was not your radio? It was also the radio of Third Reich. It was also the beginning and the Großreich. Yes. Thank you.
Of course, there's many voices in Poland and German, and there's as I told to Krzysztan, there's a reinterpretation of the history. So I know that there's as in the history of the university, there's many different voices about this. If universities should celebrate the long history, German history, or just only the Polish history. So it's like the history of all the city on the Borderlands is very complicated.
Perhaps one very short question about Szczecin, because there is, of course, you talked about literature. We have in Gdansk also Stefan Chin with this Hahnemann, even Tod in Danzig, even referring to Thomas Mann, where the boy was Polish. And in Szczecin we would have Inga Iwaszów, and also I think, as you talked about anti-German, or mostly anti-German. It was in the 90s, I think, because when I was in Greifswald working for 6 years, we had a brilliant cooperation, and there this floating thing was invented with Krzysztan, I think was his name, and he was eternally mayor. Is he still mayor? And was he anti-German? So we'll be talking about the predecessor in principle. And so what would you say is literature? Because you also mentioned Marek Krajewski in this process. You're talking about the role of literature. I would just be interested.
There's a problem in contemporary Szczecin that there's, in my opinion, there's not contemporary literature dealing with the past history of the Szczecin in contrast to Wrocław. And history of Wrocław is very interesting for the local artists, but not for artists in Szczecin. There's a problem with the creation of new narration. So maybe there's a reason that Szczecin thinking about the future. Is it good for the city?
I think it's a broader problem which you said about approach of the capital of Poland towards the so-called recovered territories. Like in a couple of days, there will be like the popular book published, which is titled Nie do Polska. I don't know how to translate it, but about the recovered territories. And I think like it's depicting perfectly the approach of the capital, this lack of understanding of palimpsest history of the western and northern territories, because there is a very black and white picture, because this is the continuity of this discourse which existed about the centralized role of Warsaw and centralized Poland, and it's very politically visible in the approach towards the recovered territories. And the political scientists were counting how much money was spent on the recovery, like real recovery of cultural artifacts in Western and Northern territories. So it's like really small amount of money is going to the so-called recovered territories from the center to recover what is really there.
Yeah, thank you very much for your very interesting talks. I would have one question for Paweł Kubicki and one very brief question for Hermann Mückler. So first my question would be, because a few months ago I talked to the guys responsible for the permanent exhibition at the new Muzeum Historii Polski, and when we talked about the part of the exhibition focusing on the 19th century, they said they would exclude cities such as Wrocław or Gdańsk from the exhibition, as they were not part of Poland at the time, but instead include cities such as Paris, where a lot of Poles lived, or at least from the intelligentsia lived at the time. Do you think that's a good approach to portray Polish history, or would you say that these cities, which were then part of Germany or Prussia, to be more precise, still should feature in depiction of Polish history? And my second question would be regarding the term of cozy colonialism. Did you come up with that, or was it present in literature on the topic? Because I found it to be very interesting and very well describing the feelings which are prevalent regarding the Habsburg colonial adventures in Eastern Europe. Thank you.
Would be very, very fast. Is it colleague Kalemba? Very fast question, but very fast. Very fast. So very fast. Very, very fast. And then we have 4 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make a short comment about Szczecin. I'm a social anthropologist and had a good fortune to do some research in Szczecin some time ago. And just wanted to point out that maybe if we look deeper at the initiatives, not on the level of the highest level of the city, like the floating gardens, but local initiatives in Szczecin that are very interesting because they are directed both against this kind of pushing Szczecin, as it is felt locally, into looking at the German past as the main identity-defining feature, and also against the Polish hegemonic, discourses. Like if you were talking about the center of Szczecin, which apparently doesn't exist, for me it does. I mean the castle and the main square with the Centrum Dialogi. And when I entered Centrum Dialogi, I was very surprised that actually, and I talked to the director, interviewed the director, and she told me, it was a conscious decision to make it not about the German past, but about and not about the Polish narrative, but about what happened here for the people who are at the moment, right now in the last 7 years. So it's interesting city, yeah, just...
Thank you. So 3 minutes for the answer, if possible, because the exhibition is waiting downstairs. Organizers are already nervous. So the floor is yours. 3 minutes.
Thank you for your question. It's a very interesting question, because in the 19th century, Poland as a state doesn't exist. So as the boundaries, in the 19th century, the biggest Polish city was Chicago in the United States, and the second Polish biggest city was Berlin, because of migration. So Chicago should be, and Berlin should be in this exhibition, because in the 19th century, the Polish state doesn't exist. So it's a difficult question. What means the Polishness without Polish state. And what this means, the Polish cities. For example, the Łódź, one of the biggest cities in the 19th century, was dominated by German, Jewish, Russian, and Poles. So most of Polish cities placed in Poland in the 19th century was very divided. Was dominated by people with different nation and ethnic groups. And according to Szczecin, I completely agree. I also did research when Szczecin competed for the European Capital of Culture in 2016, and I know that Szczecin is very interesting city, and there is many of local artist activities. But in this presentation, I should just only generalize because of the time.
Just to add on cozy colonialism, no, it's not my invention. That's from the literature. I remember that it was mentioned, for instance, by Martin Pollack. Pollack is an Austrian who is an expert on Galicia and Bukovina, the history, and has published quite many books about. And cozy colonialism, of course, it creates a bridge to how Polish people saw Austrian colonialism in that area. Of course, for the Austrian government, Galicia and Bukovina was quite a challenge because of its huge ethnic heterogeneity. And that was also the case why, for developing a new general civil code, what we call the Allgemeines Bürgerliche Gesetzbuch, that was for the first applied on Galicia. That was more or less the training province, yeah, to find out if it works out, and then it could be applied and used for the rest of the Austrian-Hungarian monarchy. So there are still relicts even today, because today's Allgemeines Bürgerliches Gesetzbuch is based on the Code Napoleon and on the General Civil Code, which was first used and tried and so in Galicia. Okay.
So thank you very much. We are only 4 minutes over time because we started 10 minutes later. So thank you very much to all of you three, and I hand it over